Welcome, everyone. It's January 11th. We are going to be discussing the Israeli movie, The Matchmaker, with Rabbi Ike.
Right. And I hope everyone got to see it and got to the right one. It's a little, I found it a little tricky to find it because there are so many movies called The Matchmaker, right?
Rabbi, if I may, I went on a search when I couldn't find it on Amazon, and I just went on a Google search, and there's this site called Tubi, T-U-B-I.
Yes.
And
that's
I
where
got
we
it
saw
on
it.
Tubi, and I had to go
Came up with
through
that.
2 commercials, but it was free. It didn't cost a penny.
Wow. Very nice.
Ours was expensive.
$1.99 watching it on Tubi. On Amazon, they charged me a whole $1.99 to see it.
Right.
Wow.
That's
Us
what
too.
we, yeah.
So, it's not to be confused, of course, with the movie from the 1950s with Shirley Booth, which I think is the original play that's the basis of Hello, Dolly, if memory serves, right? So easy to confuse it with that. And then there were all kinds of other matchmaker movies,
That's above our head. What is that?
the Indian Matchmaker and a whole bunch of others. So hopefully you found the right one. It's an Israeli movie from 2010. It was pretty successful in Israel in its time. It was nominated for Israeli Academy Awards. It wasn't Israel's entry, and the way the best foreign film category works is each nation chooses what film they're going to submit to the Academy for Oscar consideration, and Israel did not submit this one as their official entry in 2010, but it did do well in the Israeli version of the Academy Awards. It won awards for both Best Actor and Best Actress for the 2 adult leads in the movie, Adir Miller and Maya Dagan. And the director is very well known in Israel and around the world. His name is Avi Nesher, and he was born in 1952 in Ramat Gan in Israel. His father was a Romanian immigrant to the land of Israel and became a diplomat. So actually, Avi Nesher spent a fair amount of his teenage years and college years in America because his father was sent here as a diplomat. So he actually, in 1965, so he was about 13 years old, came to America and stayed through college. He went to Columbia University. So he did not study film at university. I forget what his background was, but he went back to Israel in 1977 and began to write and direct movies not too long after that, actually. He's directed something like 20 movies, including the Italian producer Dino De Laurentiis encouraged him to come to America. And so he made a couple of movies in the 1980s, maybe early 90s in English in America, produced by Dino De Laurentiis. So if you love this movie, you can find lots of other Avi Nesher movies out there. So and he continues to work now. It's based on a book called When Heroes Fly by Amir Gutfreund, who really well thought of author in Israel, kind of beloved, who died young of cancer a few years ago. He was about 50 years old when he died. He was actually born in Haifa and died in Haifa. He spent his whole life in Haifa. And that's one of the charms of this movie for me, is a movie that's made in Haifa. Trying to remember other Israeli films set in Haifa, and haven't really. I can't think of one off the top of my head. So often Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, right? But Haifa is a very special place, and And I think the movie captures some of that, the feeling of Haifa. So we can talk about that a little bit more as we go on too. So some of the actors in the movie are well known in a lot of things in Israel. Some really, I can't say I've seen again. And the beautiful young actress who plays the girl Tamara, I mean, they don't even have her picture on IMDb. I can't actually find anything out about her. So, but Adir Miller has been in a lot of movies, done a lot of work. Maya Dagan, who plays Miss Clara, it's in a lot of things. Meir, the librarian, Dror Karen Meir is Dror Karen is the name of the actor, and he's been in a few things. So, yeah, there's some pictures of Maya Dagan. In the background, there's a lot of music in this movie. I'm sure some of you noticed the music from the Summer of Love American music. White Rabbit from Jefferson Airplane, Sunshine of Your Love from Cream shows up, Magic Carpet Ride from Steppenwolf, which I can tell you that in the movie is set in 1968 in Israel. They would not have heard that music yet in Israel in 1968. It was took a much longer time for things to cross from America to Israel in those days, not like today. So some of you maybe heard me tell this story before, but when I went to Israel in 1972 and met my cousins in Pardes Chana, they had a poster of the Beatles on the wall. And I said, what a shame that they broke up. And my cousin started to cry. She had no idea that the Beatles had broken up. That was 2 years after, right? So Pardes Chana was a small town, even, by Israeli standards. So, but things just didn't travel that way. So it's not quite an anachronism that the music appears, because I think the idea is that girl, Tamara, comes from America. So she brings her own tape of those songs with her on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, right? And so that certainly was possible. But the other songs that appear in the background, there are some Israeli pop songs of the day. One is sort of pointed out that it plays under the credits at the end of the movie as well, but it's a song that the young people dance to in out on the street, right? She hears a song and says, "Finally, an Israeli song you can dance to," and they start dancing to it. It's by a group called HaChalonot HaGivoim, the Tall Windows. And they actually recorded one album in Israel in 1967, 68, and then broke up. But they had a couple of hits that year, and so it's authentic to the time period. One of the singers and songwriters in that band was a guy named Arik Einstein, who later became, people called him the voice of Israel for a while. Recorded a lot of albums and put out a lot of music. The other voice that I heard a lot in the background was an Israeli singer from the 1960s, primarily Geula Gil, who was one of several kind of young women singers of the 1960s in Israel. She toured with Theodore Bekel and released albums of Israeli folk songs, and also recorded. She's just there are sort of like generations of Israeli musicians, and so she's among the early ones, but would have been very popular in the 1960s. So I love the use of music throughout this movie. Actually, there is a score which appears in the background by a guy named Philippe Serd, a French composer, I think. but a lot of the music is not music score. It's heard bits of music in a very naturalistic way, right? The tape recorder, a record, things like that. So I love the way the movie does that, actually. The song that appears by the tall windows is called Yehezkel, Ezekiel. And it's sort of kind of about the prophet Ezekiel. It's an interesting choice. It's a good example of how even pop music in Israel is connected to Bible and liturgy in its way. So let's see, what have we left out about it? The name in English is different from its name in Hebrew. I think that's worth mentioning, and I think I understand why. I mean, the name was changed. It certainly is a movie about a matchmaker, so it kind of makes sense to call it The Matchmaker. In Hebrew, it's called Pa'am Hayiti, which essentially means once I was. And it's, but I think if I were to translate it a little more idiomatically into English, I might call it Once Upon a Time. It's kind of a way to begin a story. Once I was walking down the street and blah, 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 that's really how the essence of the title, Pa'am Hayiti. And I think in Hebrew, maybe it works a little bit better as in the sense of saying, let me tell you a story, right? And so when they wanted to release it into the American market, they didn't think that title really conveyed anything about the plot. And it is the story of a matchmaker. So I think that's where the change comes from. But I think the Hebrew name is kind of charming in a way, and it kind of gives an idea of this sort of kind of a fable, kind of a fairy tale. I mean, there's some charm to that title, I think, that's missing from a very generic sort of title, The Matchmaker. So said it's even hard to find the movie because there are so many other movies with Matchmaker in the title, right? So I don't know if it would have been easier to find if it was called Once I Was, but I don't know. So anyway.
I actually thought that because I saw the Hebrew title as well, Pa'am Hayiti, that in late 60s Israel, when you say Pa'am Hayiti, I once was, they were all immigrants. It doesn't always have to go to the Holocaust, but I would imagine many times it does. And I was just wondering that maybe there was a connection with that because, this is 20 years after the country was established. So,
right.
They're all a bunch of immigrants.
Yeah, and I think it does, look, that title, Pa'am Hayiti, I mean, I think it can be interpreted a number of ways. Like I said, I think sort of the most literal way of saying it is sort of once upon a time. But if you think about, particularly relating to the characters who are Holocaust survivors in this movie, as we've seen in some other movies about Holocaust survivors and may know from personal experience, that there's the once I was, once I was something that I am not now, right? And all of the characters who are survivors in this movie, in a sense, you can relate to them that way, that they are all broken in their own way, right? And the three main ones that you hear are, of course, Yaakov, Yankel, Bride, the matchmaker, and Miss Clara, it's Arik's father as well, who doesn't really talk about his experience, and there's that one scene where Arik asks him about his experience on the pretext that it's a project for school that he's supposed to know something, right? And so he hears about this a little bit about his story, and you get the sense of the, that sense that once I was something that I'm not. But there's also, I think, and this takes us to a really interesting, diagram of the movie, if you like. But as you were saying, 1968 is a very special year in Israel's history, right? We're just after the Six-Day War. I mean, this is sort of as open and optimistic a time as there was in the land of Israel. So sort of juxtaposed with these people who are broken still from their experience of the Holocaust, you have this young generation of Israelis that is invincible, for a moment. I mean, everything is going right, and it's just an incredible place to be. And it's a relatively short time period, really, this sort of golden year. It's sort of nice to compare it to, in America, the Summer of Love, 1967. Right? It's think about that. The Summer of Love is right after the Six-Day War in Israel. I mean, it's just the kind of very very vibrant moment, in Israeli history. And so Pam Haiti, once I was what I was in 1968, right? And the movie starts, I mean, quite deliberately in 2006 during the Second Lebanon War, which is the first Lebanon War took place in 1982-83. It lasted for more than a year. It is often thought of in Israel and by people who talk about Israel, as Israel's Vietnam, this kind of place where, so if 1967 is sort of Israel's, overcoming all the odds and winning in 6 days, Lebanon is its quagmire, right? And it still is. Right? I mean, it's, whatever they did in 1982-83 didn't really change things in Lebanon. What they did in 2006 in Lebanon didn't really change things in Lebanon. We're still talking about Hezbollah in Lebanon. So it's very deliberate that the movie starts in 2006 with radio broadcasting talking about the Lebanon War, this kind of sense of, if I can, once I was, it's not what Israel is in 2006.
Marilyn, did you have a comment?
Yes, this once I was, I think the interest of the people, the curiosity of once I was a Holocaust victim, but how did I survive? The interest is more, how did you survive? And the other point that I had to make is that these people in the film were not given any special attention or consideration that I could see. So I wondered, Rabbi, if you could comment on that.
I'm not an expert on this, but I think that it's fairly true that, a lot of survivors made it to Israel in 1948, 1949 and going on, and did not, there was not a big investment in psychological help. You survived, you're here, let's get on with it, and not that was so different from the rest of the world, right? But it's only in relatively recent years that we've started using words like PTSD and talking about these emotional and traumas and those kinds of issues, right? It's relatively recent that we've done that, but the population, the density of survivors in the Israeli population compared to the density of survivors of the Holocaust in America, it's obviously a much higher percentage, right? So you have a group of people living in Israel in the late 40s into the 50s and 60s that could probably have benefited from a lot more psychological intervention was around at the time, right? So remember, this is Israel is all about becoming Israeli, becoming strong, becoming people of the land, and all of that kind of stuff. There wasn't a lot of time for PTSD and shell shock, right?
Right.
Whether it was from soldiers who fought in 1948 in Israel or survivors of the Holocaust.
Susan?
Yeah, Rabbi, I have a comment about even the title of the matchmaker, because he wasn't really a matchmaker.
Yeah.
He never really matched anybody.
Yeah.
He was using it as a cover-up. I think he was obviously a very damaged individual, and I really felt sorry for him. I had sympathy for what he had been through, and that his experiences had so damaged him that he really didn't have much of a conscience. And although it kind of showed through toward the end, but the fact that he kept promising this, little woman that he would find somebody for her. I mean, it was so sad.
Yeah. Well, and look, he did try, right? And he does find someone for her ultimately, right? When in the funeral scene,
Yes.
when she comes to Miss Clara's funeral, right? She has a
He had
partner.
somebody. Yes.
So it's very clear that he does not make his living as a matchmaker, right?
Right.
That's the movie makes a point of saying, yeah, it's a cover, but I think there's also a sincerity that he's trying to bring love into the world. I mean, he's experienced hate. He'd like to bring love into the world. How successful he is, it's lucky sometimes, maybe.
Right, his tagline is, he gets you what you need, not what you want.
Right.
Yeah, Hubert?
Okay, yeah, well, on this thing on the cover, I mean, that's pretty normal. Chicago was very famous for it. A lot of the Chicago gangsters had flower shops. They
Yeah.
were not florists.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Right. You got to be making your money somewhere. You can't, right. So that you can whitewash it and cover it up,
I mean, today we have a problem with, for example, okay, Illinois, the selling of marijuana is legal, but the banks can't accept it because on the federal thing. So what are these guys really doing with the money?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Yeah, well, that's a very interesting business and a question, right? They can't bank with any bank that does business across state lines, because that would be a federal crime. So they have to use credit unions and other local banks. I don't know that they're quite in the same position as a guy who, he needs a legitimate business so he can hide the earnings that he's making from smuggling, right? But I do think he's sincere in a sense, not necessarily good at what he does, as a matchmaker, but sincere. And there are a few moments, where young Arik is with him, and they're watching the guy on the bench. Is he going to look at the girl? No, he's going to be too shy to look at the girl, right? So he gets a business card, right? So he's very astute in some ways about people, and very chivalrous towards Miss Clara, I think, right? I mean, he's prepared to wait for her as long as it takes. I mean, he's in love with her, but she is not capable of that, right? So they have a lovely bond in that sense. I do want to suggest to you that there's a very neat sort of there are two triangles in this movie, right? There's Yaakov and Miss Clara and Meir the librarian, and there's Arik and Tamara and her cousin, right? So you have these two triangles, a younger generation and an older generation, and sort of these parallel kinds of questions, about free love versus chastity, you know, a couple of different kinds of things that are going on here. And I just wanted to point out the kind of literary structure of it to you. I think it's quite a nice little parallel that the movie sets up there, and quite interesting. And of course, Arik is the link between the two triangles as well. You know, he knows both Meir, the librarian, and of course Yaakov and Clara. So, and he knows Tamara and his friend, right, who is Tamara's cousin. So, so it's just an interesting design, you know, kind of a beautiful structure to the movie. And of course, the movie also has this framing device so that it's very, it begins and ends in 2006, right? But in the middle has this long flashback, essentially, to 1968. So it begins with the reading of a will. The grown-up Arik discovering that Yaakov has left him his estate, whatever that may be. And it appears that after having to go back underground and start again, he's left him a few things. So leaving somebody an apartment in Israel is no small thing, right? So it's the framing device and the parallel structure of the triangles. I think that's very interesting. There's a little bit of sort of old-timey American movies in this. I mean, it's not surprising to me to find out that Avi Nesher spent some time in America, that he's probably watched all those old movie classics like The Maltese Falcon and things like that. I mean, it feels to me like there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of The Maltese Falcon. There may be a little bit of Crime and Punishment in it too, which the librarian actually mentions to him a couple of times, that, you know, are you ready to read Crime and Punishment? It's got all the things you like in it, you know, murder and suspense and morality, right? So there's a little of both of those things, but there's a lot of, you know, if you remember The Maltese Falcon, Humphrey Bogart has to sort of avenge the loss of his partner in his detective agency. But at the same time, he's been having an affair with the partner's wife, right? So there's a kind of a question of, you know, there are rules to this game that you have to play, and then there are things that you're not supposed to do, right? When someone kills your partner, you're supposed to do something about it. Humphrey Bogart says that movie, right? So it's you know, these kind of the rules of romance, you know, the rules, what's okay, very interesting in this movie. And of course, you know, we want to sympathize with the librarian, but he turns out to be kind of the bad guy in this movie, right? So I think that's an interesting, you know, these movies, the Maltese Falcon and movies like that, they always have the femme fatale, you know, the dangerous woman. And you're set up for Miss Clara to be that, but it turns out it's not her at all, right? It's Meir is the femme fatale, right, in this, the one who causes the downfall of everybody in the movie. So I think it's the structure is very nice, very interesting, very well thought out. Perhaps that's Amr Gutfreund's book. I'm not sure, or perhaps it's Avi Nesher's knowledge of filmmaking and things like that. But the movie manages to be funny and sad. So I like that combination when a director can pull that off. It can be as broad as the beginning, where the boys are sort of trying to trick the matchmaker. You know, he's talking about his sister with the flipper, right? You know, so it can be as broad and silly as that, and then be very serious. And of course, Yaakov calls him Flipper for the rest of the movie. you noticed. So I think, pretty clever. So, yeah, Howie, Hubie, sorry.
Actually, actually, you know what? I had an observation, and then I got a question for something that you brought up.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about. I obviously would miss the thing about the movie, the music being at the wrong time. But this goes back to me. I remember when I was in the military, we got paid zip. We would sit and watch movies in the barracks, and we'd watch war movies, and you would spot all the errors that they made. For example, it was supposed to be in World War II, and they got a jib from Korea and so forth, and we'd all sit there and have a big laugh. But now my question to you is: you brought up something that I heard in the movie. Was smuggling a big problem in Israel?
Yes, I think it still is, actually, but it definitely was then. And it's a great depiction of Haifa too. I mean, Haifa, we've talked a lot about movies set in New York and how New York is a character. I would say Haifa is a character in this movie. Haifa is a very interesting city in Israel. It's unlike Tel Aviv, which was essentially created and settled by Jewish immigrants. Haifa is a much older city. It's Israel's oldest port. Well, Jaffa is really the oldest port. That goes back to the Bible. But its oldest sort of functional modern port was in Haifa. And so that's where goods came into the country. Living down at the bottom of Haifa is built on a mountain, Mount Carmel, and down at the bottom of the mountain is the harbor. And so that's where the ships are unloaded. So that's where things fall off the back of the loading dock, right? And then you know what I mean, and end up being smuggled, right? So, and whether things come in on ships that are not official ships or various kinds of ways to do that, there's always been a kind of a smuggler's economy in Israel and in Haifa still, and even now, frankly, because taxes in Israel are very high. The taxes that Israelis have to pay on consumer goods are high, and so there has always been, my whole life, there's been kind of a black market in blue jeans and other kinds of products that aren't made in Israel that come in and people want to get them under the table, right? I know a guy, right?
Right. So I would say two things, and John and Gail, I see you. One, I thought you were going to bring up, it's unusual in this city, the closer you are to the water, the poorer the neighborhood.
Right. Yeah.
Like in Chicago, you're close to the water. That's a really good neighborhood, but you could see they live near the docks. It was a terrible neighborhood. And
it's always been separated that way. I mean, right?
Yeah.
It's actually been the most integrated city in Israel for all of Israel's history. And before that, it's a place where Jews and Arabs live next to each other in the same neighborhood, but especially down at the bottom of the mountain, right? At the foot of Mount Carmel, by the harbor, where the oil tankers come in and stuff like that, so that it's not the beautiful waterfront of Tel Aviv or Netanya or places like that. It's the grimy sort of port part of the city. And so the wealthy people in Haifa live at the top of Mount Carmel, where there are beautiful homes and extravagant hotels and things like that. And then down at the bottom is where the poor folk live. And so in the middle, there's a middle class in the middle of the mountain, So it's where you live on the mountain is defined not by ethnicity, but by economics in Haifa. And that makes it different than some of the other cities in Israel. So
I'm John and Gail.
Yeah.
I have a question that Rabbi hasn't really addressed. And well, for me, it's a question. What purpose is being served by using little people as the owners of the movie theater? Does it show that they survived? Were they Holocaust survivors? I was very unclear about their role, other than to find a mate for my ear and that lovely owner of the movie
Yes,
theater. What
yes,
what
movie-
was his thinking? The author, producer, the director, whoever chose these little people to be in the
Yeah.
movie.
So there is one mention, I think, I only heard it one time, that they are Holocaust survivors. They all are European immigrants to Israel, and they're survivors of Dr. Mengele. I believe it mentions at one point in the movie. So, you know, who, I don't know, you know, famously did studies on twins, and or infamously, I suppose, did studies on twins and other things like that. So I think little people were also part of his diabolical interest. So I think that's that, you know, so did it have to be little people? No. I mean, I would say that that's sort of interesting in the sense that, you know, here we are in 2022 and we're talking a lot about how you cast movies and, you know, differently abled people and all those kinds of things. And so here's a movie from 2010. I didn't have to do that, but chose to. Now, I can't speak to the fact that maybe they're based on real people. And the author of the book, I mentioned, Amir Gutfreund, was born in Haifa and died in Haifa. So he may, you know, so, you know, it's not an autobiographical book. He was only about 5 years old in 1968, but maybe it speaks to some of the characters he remembers meeting growing up. So that's certainly possible. But it's the range of, you know, one thing that the movie I think does set out to do is refute a kind of an idea that to be a survivor, you had to have been a collaborator in some way, right? Which there's a book that they talk about a few times in the movie that seems to suggest that, right? You know, if you survived, you must have been a capo or something like that. So this movie makes the point that no, you know, some people just survived, right? And a lot of survivors tell the story that way. They just chose to go this way instead of that way one day, and that's what saved their lives, right? So it's just an accident of history who survives and who doesn't. So by using those characters at the movie theater, perhaps they obviously were not going to be used as capos, you know, or collaborators in some way with the Nazis, right?
I actually think that book, The House of Dolls, was talking about prostitutes and the intimate, you know, because this is the book.
Yeah.
You know, that Clara was a prostitute, and that's how she survived.
That's what Meir thinks, because he's written that book.
Right.
Which is not necessarily Clara's story. We don't actually know Clara's story.
Right.
We do know that intimacy is impossible for her, but that's not necessarily why.
Yeah. Elaine?
Yeah, at one point, there's a close-up of the numbers tattooed on the arm.
Yeah.
Is there any mention of the scars on his face?
I don't think so. We never find out, and the actor does not have those scars, by the way. So it's a deliberate choice, right? He doesn't have those in real life, right? Vanessa, you showed his picture before.
He does. He does not.
Yeah, Adir Miller is his name.
Here he
yeah, so he's actually a pretty good-looking guy.
Yeah.
You know, in his way. So,
and
but,
that's him with
right. So we can assume that something happened, you know, in the Holocaust, but we don't know.
Yeah.
So no, it never explained at all. I do like that it's a physical manifestation of an interior issue, right? You know, Miss Clara looks perfect. She looks beautiful. She looks together, you know, she dresses well. She does, you know, she's very classy in her way.
She gives lessons on how to be classy.
Right. How to talk to a woman.
Yeah.
You know, she's a hostess, you know, she hosts these card games, and, you know, but so she wears her scars inside and he wears them on the outside, you know, and maybe some inside too, of course, but I think that's part of the concept of the movie, is to have him show those scars on the outside.
Hubie and then Marilyn.
Well, you know, on these things that are not said in the movie, this thing, I think writers who write scripts or write books have this problem. For example, in the book, The Assignment, a man comes in to the inn, and he's from Texas or something, and you're waiting to see if he's going to come up with some sort of anti-Semitic or something, and he kind of disappears, and they don't develop it at all, and you never hear about him again.
Yeah.
So I think the writers sometimes are going in direct, saying, no, I don't want to do that. But they're not going to go back and rewrite things.
Yeah.
That's what happens, I think.
That does happen sometimes, and certainly in the editing process of movies, sometimes you know, a scene gets cut because the movie's too long, right? So maybe there's a scene in there somewhere where he talks about his scars and it's on the cutting room floor. That's certainly possible, but I also think sometimes it's just about showing us something about a character. You don't have to tell everything, right? I mean, human beings are enigmatic. I mean, it's impossible to know everything about anybody, right? So the fact that a guy has a scar and the movie doesn't tell us how he got it, I don't find that so troubling. I mean, I find that to be a kind of it's a shorthand for who he is, right? And you can see in a few scenes how he might even have gotten that scar, you know, if there hadn't been a Holocaust, right? The scene fairly early in the movie where he confronts those Israeli soldiers because they've insulted Sylvia, right? You know, he is not afraid to confront people, right? So whatever he was during the Holocaust, we don't know, but we have to use our imagination and you know, he's showing us a character that's belligerent enough to think, yeah, this guy was probably beaten, you know, right, when he was wherever he was. So
Marilyn.
Yes, well, that scarring on his face makes him look very tough, and it helps shape the character.
Yeah,
as he develops. He is tough, but he's really not in the end. I mean, I love the transition that takes place and the growth of the development. But Clara is so opposite of her physical appearance, as you say, Rabbi, and she is so fragile that she has to send her own child away because she isn't capable of taking care of herself, not alone her own child. And so the thread of love that's played throughout the entire film, used in so many different ways, used for trying to heal their own pain. Love is used individually and between themselves. And the librarian, when you say, you know, he sort of becomes corrupt, he does it because he said he would die for Clara. I mean, he would do anything for her. He tried and tried, and whatever he could do to break up the relationship between her and the librarian, because as the police are going up, he says, don't bother Clara. Don't take her, just take him.
Right.
And what he really, his emphasis is, his whole, I think, mode of operandum is to get the matchmaker away from his beloved Clara and give him a chance to,
right.
you know, that she'll turn to him, since anything to get Clara.
Right. And created this whole story that, you know, that Yaakov is the one who's using Clara, that he's misusing her. And so there's a scene in the library where Arik is talking to Meir, the librarian, about detectives and the books he likes to read. And the librarian at one point says something like, detectives are like philosophers, they're both searching for truth. And I think it's a great line. The movie kind of asks us to be the detectives and to search after the truth. And we know that Meir has found this distorted, warped version of the truth, right? When he looks at Yaakov, all he can see is a smuggler, and he thinks he's a pimp. And, we know that the truth about Yaakov is much more complicated than that. He is a smuggler, but he's also a romantic, and he's got a lot of redeeming characteristics. That scene where he confronts those Israeli soldiers at the table, is chivalry in 1968, right? And extracts an apology out of them. He's Clara's protector. In some sense, he's Sylvia's protector too, and he means it when he says to her, he's looking for the right person for her, and finds him. It's not Meir. So, and Meir, on the other hand, is incapable of seeing the truth, right? Because the truth is more than what's apparent. So.
Hubie.
Okay, this movie I thought was a great movie because it had so many ways you could look at it. And again, this happens to be how you look at people. It can be so misleading. Sometimes when you say these things come back to my mind. Years ago, I was calling on a small art studio. There's just a couple of guys, and one of them, the guy was a giant. He was just huge. And you kept thinking if anybody ever crossed this guy, they would be in real trouble. Turned out the guy was a real milquetoast.
Yeah.
You just cannot tell by physical appearance about an individual.
Absolutely not. Right. As we're coming to a close, I'm glad you liked it. I hope others liked it as well. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, hopefully we whetted your appetite to go see it. We didn't give away the ending, so you can watch it. But I will try not to give away the ending here. But I do think there's an interesting, very small thing that I pointed. So what happens to these triangles? They both break up, right? I mean, they both fall apart. So as far as we can tell, Tamara goes back with her uncle and is never a part of Arik's life again. It's just maybe another way of thinking about that. Once I was, once upon a time, this happened to me. This is the first girl, I kissed, right? The first one I was with. So maybe it's that story. But Tamara does not appear as an adult. I mean, we don't know anything about what happens to her. But at the very end, when Arik is talking to his father, and his father tells him, I spoke to your wife an hour ago and told her you were on the way home. The wife's name is Michal. And Michal is the little sister of his friend. Oh. And I just want to point that out. I mean, it's a very small detail, and Michal is a common name, but why do that, right? So I think that this tiny detail is that he ends up married to his best friend's sister, at the end, So none of that is mentioned. She's just a little girl, in, when they're kids, So, but I just thought that was an interesting thing to notice. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Linda?
Well, I wanted to just say that I really enjoyed the movie. It took a while to get into it because I was so busy reading
Yeah.
the dialogue and trying to watch the movie at the same time. But to me, the movie was of people coming to terms with their life and a young man coming of age. That was what it was to me. And I found it extremely incisive of what Israel would have been like. To me, they were very naive. And because I don't know, I can't put myself into a 16-year-old boy's mind, and his body, of course. But I found some of it very interesting and some of it very naive. And I enjoyed just seeing Israel and the people at that time, what they were like. So I thank you for introducing it. But
Sure.
just
Well,
the transliteration took up so much of it for me.
Yeah.
I don't read that fast.
right.
And, I would have liked to have, because sometimes they just change the screens really fast. I
Right.
know Israelis speak very quickly.
Yeah. Now, first of all thanks go to Vanessa for finding this movie and recommending it to me. So thank you, Vanessa, for finding it. I think it is a very good choice. So I hope you liked it. It is interesting what's not in this movie, right? I mean, so many Israeli films today, and even certainly 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago, are about the matzav, as they call it, the situation in Israel, what goes on between Israelis and Palestinians. And, sometimes they're love stories, between Israelis and Palestinians. Sometimes they're dramas, there have been comedies, whatever. But this movie barely mentions it at all, right? I mean, and I think that that's very sort of in some ways very authentic to 1968. It's a brief moment where it didn't seem like it was going to be an intractable problem, right? Did some people see it coming already? Sure. But we're talking about, a year after the 6-Day War. I mean, there was still a lot of talk about the plan was, okay, we're going to give this land back, except for Jerusalem, right? There was a lot of sort of, I guess, a lot of optimism about what opportunity there was. And there's I have in my office the copies of the Jerusalem Post from June of 1967. And the editorials and the articles are so optimistic, right? There's interviews with Palestinians after Israel conquers Jerusalem about how much better Jerusalem is going to be without Jordan, right? I mean, there's just a moment of this that is pretty quickly lost for a variety of reasons, right? That's all political. The point is that the movie doesn't go there. You see some Arabs in the streets, that's the way it is, right? They're just, part of the fabric of Haifa. And that is one of the things that's somewhat unique about Haifa. But it's just interesting that this movie, in sort of capturing the spirit of that moment, says, we don't have to talk about this at all. And that makes it fairly rare among Israeli movies.
Yeah. I'm glad everyone enjoyed it. I'll just take this opportunity to remind you that we'll start up again on Tuesdays on February 1st with The Human Stain and Little White Lies. I haven't looked to see where they are, but I will shortly. And I know Inglourious Bastards, which is not until it's not till the end. I've seen that it's been running on the television. So I recorded it and I'll watch it the week
Yeah,
before.
Schindler's List has been running on one of the movie stations lately too, so.
Yeah, they usually run that right around Yom HaShoah.
But so you can always watch them ahead if they show up in
Right.
or cable system you guys have. I want to mention this Friday, we have Martin Luther King weekend this weekend. So starting Friday, actually early at 5 p.m. we have we're collaborating with 6 or 7 other congregations, and we have a African-American Jewish gospel singer who will be doing Kabbalat Shabbat for us online. So I invite you to join us at 5 p.m. And then at 6:30, we'll have our somewhat abbreviated service, because we will have been having Kabbalat Shabbat for 90 minutes before that. So
And right, and Sunday morning is Dr. Willie Cobb Jr. He spoke to our kids, and a Black American talking about his journey, and he's from the South Side. I've heard him speak. He's very interesting. So we got a lot of good things going on this weekend.
right. So, and it's maybe not too late to get holiday, right?
Oh yeah, I think you can still get, that's for next week. And I don't think you have to get the green one. If you just want to get the regular holiday, you can order that.
It's not this weekend. I think it is, right?
Is it?
It's
Oh.
MLK weekend.
Oh,
Tu B'Shvat,
maybe.
which
Then
is-
it may be too late because we have to order it.
I don't know.
Call me tomorrow at the office.
And this Sunday is Tu B'Shvat, and we'll be sending out a
Yes.
link for that as well. Hazon, which is a Jewish environmental organization, is doing a Tu B'Shvat Seder, and we're going to be a part of that as well. So, so if you're looking to celebrate Tu B'Shvat, that's a great way to do it.
Okay,
Great, thanks everybody.
great seeing everyone.
Thank you.
If you need
Thank
anything,
you
we'll
all.
see you. Be well.
Thank you.
Stay
You too.
safe.
It was
Stay
a
in.
great
Be
movie.
warm.
Yeah, thank you all.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.